Welcome back to Matt's Automotive Channel. In the previous video, we worked on this 2005 Subaru Legacy GT and addressed some vacuum leaks and then relearned the throttle body. And at the time I did the video, I thought we had fixed the problem with the engine idling rough. However, after driving it around for a while, I noticed that it's still not quite perfect. It is so much better than it was, but it's not perfect. And we no longer have misfires or anything like that. But when the engine sometimes is sitting there idling, how do I explain it? It's not like a misfire, but it's almost as if the engine is imbalanced. If you were to take a weight and hang it on the end of the flywheel, that's kind of what it feels like. It's just not smooth. It's not misfiring. It's not chugging. It's not gasping for air or anything. It just doesn't feel perfectly balanced. All right, so in this video, I'm going to take a look at a few other things before I pull the motor. I'm pulling the motor because I'm going to do the clutch, and you're probably asking, well, why not pull the transmission? Well, it's not that much more difficult to pull the motor, and by pulling the motor, I can do a lot of other things and checks on the motor, whereas I pull the transmission, it's still difficult access to get to things on the motor, so that's why I'm going that route. So anyway, what I've done here is I've set up a couple of meters, one for oil pressure and one for fuel pressure, so we'll take a look at that. And then also we'll take a look at the PCV valve, or under the intercooler there, and see if that could be contributing to our issue with the rough idle. So let me show you what we've done. Okay, normally the alternator resides right here. I removed the alternator, and what I did was I pulled this oil pressure switch from this location here, cleaned the adapter up here a bit, and then I hooked up an oil pressure gauge, which is right here. And then over here on the fuel side, went ahead and disconnected the fuel line from this fuel pressure regulator and then hooked up a gauge here. So at this point, I'm going to leave the alternator off. We can run the engine a little bit without the alternator as long as we've got a good battery, which we do. And we'll take a look at what's going on here with the fuel and oil and see if everything is within spec there. The first thing that we're going to do is check the fuel pressure with the fuel regulator out of the equation here. So I'm going to pull the vacuum hose going to the fuel regulator, which is located right down here on the driver's side on the intake. So I'm going to pull that guy off. And the reason for that is the fuel pressure should differ depending on whether the vacuum line is hooked to the fuel regulator or not. By disconnecting that, we're looking at a no vacuum going to the fuel regulator, which normally would be when the engine's under load and the throttle body's open all the way, you would have no vacuum. So that should put the fuel pump into a high pressure state, and within the high pressure state, it should be between 41 and 46 psi. Then we'll go ahead and connect the vacuum line, which should drop it down to around 33 to 38 psi. So that'll tell us whether our fuel pressure regulator is working. There's a couple other things that we're going to do even before that. I'm going to just fire it up, or actually just turn the ignition into the run position, which will fire up the fuel pump. This should come up real quick. If it does not come up real quick, that could indicate a clogged filter or a bad fuel pump or a clog in the line or something. So we'll see how quickly that comes up. And then once it comes up, I'll turn the ignition off, and then we'll just see if it holds pressure. It should hold pressure. If it does not, then we have a leak somewhere in the fuel system. Could even be an injector that's stuck open that also could cause to a poor idle. So then once we've looked at that, we'll go ahead and keep it running and then get the oil up to temperature. It'll start out relatively high and then should come down, and we'll take a look at the oil pressure and see what it's doing. Now the oil pressure looks like it should be, once it's up to operating temperature, which is 176 degrees Fahrenheit, and at idle, or around 600 RPM, it should be about 14 PSI. And then at 6,000 PM, it should come up to around 57 PSI. So we'll check that and see if it's within that range. Okay, before putting the battery back in, I'm not going to put the alternator back in, so we need to be a little careful of this connection here that goes to the alternator. It's pretty well protected by that cap, but we want to make sure that it doesn't make contact with any parts of the motor that may be grounded, because we don't want to short the battery out. So I'm just gonna wrap this rag around it here and tape it just to ensure that we don't have any issues there. And also keep it free and clear of any of the belt or rotating parts. Now we can go ahead and put the battery back in. And before doing this, make sure that you have a fully charged battery, because again, we're not going to have the alternator hooked up to be running the higher voltage to the battery and charging it. So make sure you start out with a good battery to begin with. Okay, so for the first test, we'll go ahead and focus on this fuel pressure. And what we're looking for is for it to come up immediately and then hold pressure. So let's go ahead and give that a shot. Okay, so I'll go ahead and put the key in the ignition and turn it to the run position without starting it. And hopefully that fuel pressure will come right up. Okay, I just set a timer. We're locked in here. It looks like it 42 PSI, so we'll see if it comes down. Okay, here we are a half hour later. Still looks like the fuel pressure is up, so it doesn't look like we have any leaks. All right, let's go ahead and start the car and take a look at the oil pressure. Looks like right up there at 90, at least to start with. That should come down as the engine heats up. Okay, so engine running here. Looks like we're at right around 34 PSI. I'll go ahead and pull the vacuum hose off right down here. And we'll see if it comes up. And it does. So it looks like a fuel pressure is working out right around 42 or so. Okay, car's been on a couple minutes and it looks like our oil pressure is slowly starting to come down. As you can see, our engine temperature is coming up here. And it looks like our pressure now is, oil pressure anyway, looks like it's right around 34 or so. Okay, let's go ahead and raise the engine RPMs and see if that oil pressure comes up a bit. Yep, comes right up to where it's supposed to be. And then right back down. Still seems a little high though. It's supposed to be around 14 PSI, but maybe we're not fully warmed up. So let's give it a few more minutes and see if that doesn't continue to come down. Okay, the car is fully warmed up now, and it looks like our oil pressure is hanging in right around 22 or so, and it's just supposed to be above 14, so it looks like we're doing good there. Fuel pressure still looks good there. I'm going to pull the vacuum hose off, let it come up, and then I'll shut the car off, and then we'll see if it holds the pressure. Okay, we're going to shut her off now. Okay, now before we take this apparatus off, we don't want fuel squirting everywhere. So I'm going to pull the fuse for the fuel pump. And then we'll go ahead and turn the car on and wait for the pressure to come down. The engine should stall out. Okay, let's fire it up. Fuel pressure is dropping. Now we can go ahead and remove the battery, because we probably still will have a little bit of fuel spillage and we don't want any risk for a spark or a fire. So I'll pull this out. Okay, with the battery out, we can now go ahead and replace the fuse. And the cover. That way we won't get any fuel squirting in here. And again, always wear safety glasses when doing this. These fastener remover pliers work great for this sort of thing. And yeah, there we go. We got some fuel spillage, just like we thought. Wow, quite a bit. Okay, the only other thing for me to check really was the PCV valve. So I went ahead and removed the intercooler. And the PCV valve on this is located right there next to the turbo. And this is actually the valve here that sat in there like so. So anyway, I pulled it out, took a look at it. There's a little bit of buildup in there, but it's still passing air, and it still rattles. And when I push air in here, it goes one way and then does not the other. So the check valve portion of it is working just fine. So again, I don't suspect any issues here with the PCV valve. So as far as the rough idling, I still don't have it totally figured out. So anyway, we got to put a clutch in this thing. So I'm going to start prepping to get the motor out. All right, at this point, I've completed all the checks I wanted to do before pulling the motor, so I kind of know what to look for. I know now that we have a good oil pump. I don't need to change that. I will look for a variety of other things once I have the motor out while we're putting the new clutch in. So anyway, that's all I'm going to do on this particular video, and on the next video we'll go ahead and start with removing the motor and installing the clutch. So I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.